Download our app and find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and on the web at KBLA 1580.
That's right.
Again, you can find all of our socials at KBLA 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about.
By the way, if you miss any of our weekday shows in real time, you can always catch up by checking out the podcasts of your favorite shows at your leisure. At KBLA Talk 1580, we've got your black.
Follow the leader when the leader.
Oh my God.
Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader.
If this world were mine.
Hey, Roman numeral 7, babe, drop it like it's hot. If this world was mine, I'd take your dreams and make them multiply. If this world was mine, I'd take your enemies in front of God. Introduce them to that light, hit them strictly with that fire. Fire, 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 fire. Hey, Roman numeral 7, babe, drop it like it's hot. If this world was mine, I'd take your dreams and make them multiply. If this world was mine, I'd take your enemies in front of God. Introduce them to that
You
light.
are listening to The Black Pack. I am your host, Adrianne Shropshire, here at KBLA Talk 1580. And we are just all excited about this new Kendrick album. So I hope you appreciate the little snippets here that, have been bringing fun and happiness and joy to at least me, and I know Andy, since this morning when the album dropped. So I had said earlier when we started at the top of the last hour that there's a lot going on in the news, and there's things that I feel like is important for us to follow up on so that folks know that they're happening. And one of the things I think that we talked about a couple of times here on the show was the impact or the effects that the Trump abortion bans were having on women across the country. And one of the places that we talked about was in Georgia, where we know that 2 women died as a result of not being able to receive the care that they needed. And there was a committee set up to investigate the maternal mortality in the state of Georgia. And that's how we learned that there were these 2 women who died because they weren't able to receive care. And so the thing that I would report out, and this is again just about the importance of our staying vigilant and staying on top of our elected officials and the bodies that they appoint to help us understand what's happening in our government, but also to make sure that our government is functioning. The sort of result of that, you would think, would have been to continue to understand what is happening with women who need care and aren't receiving care, and just ways to understand and address maternal mortality. You would think that we would lean into that, right, to make sure that we're protecting women, that we're protecting women's health. But no, of course not in Georgia. That is not what happened at all as a result of us learning about the deaths of those 2 women. What they decided to do instead was to dismiss all of the members of the state maternal mortality review committee. So instead of leaning in and saying, what more can we do? How can we help women? How can we protect women? They decided to dismantle the committee that was there to bring to light challenges happening with women's maternal health. So again, as all of this sort of plays out, and unfolds, there's a lot of key issues that we need to stay on top of and that we should be paying attention to. And again, as noted with the nonprofit killer bill, right? Our voices do have impact, and it's important for us not to just look away from bad things that are happening, from terrible moves that our government, whether it's the federal government, the state government, or our local government, is making. It is important for us to engage them, right? It's important for us to engage them and to insist that that they do what they need to do. Our power is not just on Election Day, but it's literally every day. And so we need to make sure that we're staying on top of that. That was one story that I thought that was important just to follow up on and let folks know how things are playing out on that front in the state of Georgia. So I want to bring into the conversation back to the sort of what do we know about what happened? How are we understanding not just the election that just happened? How are we understanding the way that voters engaged? I want to bring into this conversation Chris Towler, who is, and Chris, I just want to say that it's like you and I have just kind of been following each other on social media, right? It's like it really was. Like, I love the stuff that you put out. You have great commentary, and I thought we should just actually have a conversation. So thank you for coming on. I appreciate all that you have been putting out there and trying to help people understand about what is happening. But I ask a question at the beginning of the show. I opened by talking about Kendrick's new album. And I failed to ask Cornell Belcher when he was on what he thought about the album and what track he is feeling right now. And he rightly called me out for not asking him his thoughts. So I'm not going to make that mistake with you because I know that you listened to the album today because I saw you talking about it on Blue Sky or something. So before we get into the heavy stuff, your thoughts on KDAT's new album.
I'm just getting into it. It's an exciting thing to have going into the holidays, especially with all of the less exciting election news from the perspective of the Black community. But right now I'm getting into Hey Now, seeing what other tracks really hit. So I'm excited to get through it.
Yeah, I do. Andy listened to it. I text Andy this morning. He was just starting to listen to it. I had listened to it twice, and I still need to go back. I mean, I was just listening to it to enjoy it, right? And I'm not one of those people that does all the, the like think pieces on everything that he says in every album. But I need to pay a little bit more attention to it. So I'm going to do that. I want to get into a conversation with you, though, both about your work and the Black Voter Project, and then just about how your sort of your perspective and analysis on the election. I'm going to do all of that when we come forward, and have a little bit of not just a conversation about what happened and what's happening right now, but also sort of your perspective on what was happening when we were going into the election, because I think that's one of the things that I was watching and sort of engaging around with you on social media was about all of the talk about Black voters and what was and wasn't going to happen. And so I want to get into that when we come forward. Stay with us. This is KBLA Talk 1580.
You're part of the Black Pack with Adrianne Shropshire on KBLA Talk 1580. Are you an entrepreneur looking to take your business to new heights? KBLA Talk 1580 is your partner in success. Every day, we celebrate and elevate Black-owned businesses across our community. Our KBLA SMB Marketplace currently features The Cookie Dip, Badass Bakes, Hair Concoction, Higher Education Accreditation Consulting, LACC Radiology Technology Department, and Malik Books. Your business deserves to be heard. Let KBLA Talk 1580 amplify your voice and connect you with our powerful community of listeners. Email smb@kbla1580.com today. That's smb@kbla1580.com. At KBLA Talk 1580, we've got your black.
Oh, could this vintage store be any cuter?
Right? And the best part? They accept Discover.
Accept Discover? In a little place like this? I don't think so, Jennifer.
Oh, yeah, huh? Discover's accepted where I like to shop. Come on, baby, get with the times.
Right, so we shouldn't get the parachute pants?
These are making a comeback. I think.
Discover is accepted at 99% of places that take credit cards nationwide. Based on the February 2024 Nielsen report.
When you choose Gillette, you choose the best a man can get. close and smooth shaves, award-winning beard care, and a gentle trim below the belt. And this November and December, every Gillette purchase supports Movember in the fight against prostate cancer. Choose Gillette and make a difference. Shave down and stand strong with the 1 in 8 men who will be diagnosed with prostate cancer. Visit pggoodeveryday.com/Movember for details. Exclusions apply.
KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
KBLA Talk 1580 reminds you, when we fight, we win. The Youth Justice Coalition is challenging America's addiction to incarceration and discrimination. YJC works to dismantle policies leading to mass incarceration, law enforcement violence, and the school-to-prison pipeline. Their approach, transformative justice, community intervention, free LA high school, legal defense, and system monitoring. YJC promotes safety without relying on prisons. Their goal, prevent system contact and help people exit the system through direct action, advocacy, and education. Want to get involved or need help? Call 323-235-4243. That's 323-235-4243. Join YJC in creating change. When we fight, we win. KBLA Talk 1580, your voice for justice. This is a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
Let's get back to more of the Black Pack with Adrianne Shropshire right now on KBLA Talk 1580.
You are listening to the Black Pack, and we are talking with Dr. Chris Towler, principal investigator at the Black Voter Project. And so, Chris, before we get into some questions about the electorate and the election, can you just tell our listeners a little bit about the Black Voter Project?
Absolutely. I just, again, wanted to say thank you for the opportunity of having me on. As you mentioned, we have been sort of talking back and forth across or sometimes past one another online. So It's really great to be here and have this conversation. The Black Voter Project started back in 2016, coming out of graduate school, completing my PhD, studying Black politics. It was very clear that there was a lack in actual data on the Black community to draw from. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the work on the Black community, especially in academia, had been done in the 80s and 90s. And since then, there hadn't been a whole lot of really good, accurate, and reliable academic data, let alone public opinion data, collected on the Black community. And so I started trying to collect that data. It started with a pilot study in 2017, just sort of a battleground study of a little over 500 African Americans. And from there, it's turned into a series of national, statewide, and regional surveys, sort of culminating this year in the multi-wave longitudinal election study, which ended up being three waves of recontact interviews starting in April, with the third wave being collected in October right before the election. And we are going to collect a fourth and final wave of this election survey coming up in December here to get like a post-election look at how everybody's been feeling. So.
That sounds fantastic. I can't wait for that. So we're gonna just put a pin in that and make sure we have you back to talk about those results. So one of the things I know that we're talking either at or past each other on social media about was the sort of pre-election fixation, obsession, I mean, I don't even know what word to call it, on Black voters. And it sort of shifted early on, it was broadly Black voters, and there was going to be this massive political realignment, and Black people were going to go run into the Republican Party. And then it sort of, couldn't be sustained, right? Like the argument couldn't really be sustained because there was no evidence to point to. And then it sort of, drilled down and was like, well, okay, maybe not all Black voters, but it's Black men. It's Black men, right? And then we had to go through, weeks, I feel like, of, saying no, right? Like this still is not, there's no evidence to the point. But we do know that there was some things happening just in terms of trends with Black voters, sort of July, right? We know that there was some, folks were not highly motivated, right? I remember being in focus groups and people saying like, look, no, I'm not motivated. Do not ask me anymore if I'm motivated. I'm not. I will do what I need to do, right? Like I'll show up and vote, but I'm not going to be happy about it, right? I don't like my choices. But something happened, right, when the vice president became the nominee. And so just before we talk about sort of the aftermath, just what was your take on the impact that she had on the map, right? I mean, we talked earlier with Cornell, about about turnout, right? And where we expected, maybe for her not to do so well. And we look at a place like Georgia where she actually gained, votes over 2020. But what was your sort of take on her impact on the electorate overall, and particularly her impact on Black voters?
I think you can't understate the impact that she had, particularly on Black voters. Changed the political map, really made the election competitive in ways that likely weren't going to happen when Biden was on the ticket. When we look at sort of this discourse about Black support from Trump, it's unfortunate that this is what brought Black voters into the fold, really in the mainstream discussion, because a lot of it was coming from really poor polling of Black folks, where there were large public opinion polls that had small subsets of Black folks that had extremely large errors suggesting that there was going to be an increased support for Trump amongst Black voters. And then, a number of polls, including the Black Voter Project's poll in April, even when Biden was the nominee, kind of suggested otherwise, where when you have actual good data on Black folk, large sample, representative sample, Black support for Trump wasn't any higher than it was in 2020 in these pre-election polls, going all the way back to April. And that only continued to decrease as the polling picked up the shift from Biden to Harris throughout the election cycle. And I think that the flip side of that, though, is that it suggested that there was a tremendous increase in enthusiasm as Harris took over the nomination as well. For example, in the polling that we did, the pre to post polling since Harris took over the ticket, we had the percent of Black voters that would definitely vote at 58% in April, and that jumped up to 67% once Harris became the nominee. And so there was, again, almost a 10 percentage point shift just in those who said they were definitely going to vote once Harris became the nominee. And the shifts were the largest amongst those that were somewhat unlikely to vote to start with. So amongst those who had a high school or less education, the shift was a 14 percentage point increase in likelihood to vote, and amongst those who were independents. And so it's not just that Harris created more enthusiasm, but that she actually created enthusiasm amongst Black voters who were not likely to vote from in the first place. And so to really think about the shift that she created in the electorate, you have to understand how far enthusiasm was down and how much apathy existed within the Black community prior to her even joining the ticket, right?
Yeah.
And again, it's unfortunate that a lot of the conversation centered on whether people were going to vote for Trump when it really should have been on whether or not people were going to vote at all.
Correct.
And of course, like you mentioned, you have this backbone of the Democratic Party that's going to vote regardless. But as was talked about in the first hour, it's those Black voters on the margins, the unlikely low propensity Black voters that came out in 2020, that might have come out during one of the Obama elections, that really needed to come out this year to keep some of those swing states blue.
Yeah. I think that one of the things that I want to just circle back, I don't know if that's the right term, but just to this idea that there was this assumption, this assertion that Black voters would, not have the same level of support for the vice president that they had in the previous presidential elections, that they, that there would be higher levels of support for Trump. And again, I think that, one of the things that we know is that this same argument comes up before every election, right? About specifically about Black voters, which at some point, maybe you'll write something about this, because it's deeply weird. First of all, right, this fixation, and almost like some weird fantasy that Black voters they're gonna all become Republicans, right? And how do we usher in that era, right? Something very strange about it all. But before every election, we hear this argument, and then the election happens, and it doesn't come to pass. And so I think that the part of the story in this moment needs to be that is also true once again, right? That the levels of support for Donald Trump, for Black voters overall, were the same as they were in 2020, and we need to be careful about letting people, folks assert data that isn't accurate. If we look at the exit polls, which of course, we are all waiting for the validated data, right? Because that's going to tell us, right, at some point what numbers are real. But what we have right now are the exit polls, and those aren't the best things to be looking at. But we know is that even if you wanted to go with the argument, if you wanted to live in the false narrative around black men, we also know that the increase in support for Trump among black men also didn't really take shape. So if we look at the exit polls from 2020, it was like 19% support, which we know came down. That number came way down when we looked at when the data was validated, but 19% in the exit poll in 2020, and I think it's at 20 or 20% now, right? So like negligible, right? And so I bring this up because I'm still hearing this argument, right? Or people still trying to assert movement among black men that is not really real, right? And so what do you make of that? Like, what is it just people trying to, advance the narrative because they don't want to be wrong, right? Is it trying to, make a story out of very, marginal movement to sort of make the broader case, right? What is that about?
I think there's two things going on here. One, I think it's a misinterpretation of public opinion data. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the data that was collected suggesting an increase in support for Trump, especially among black men, was getting responses from people who were not voters, who are not part of the electorate, and who are also more susceptible to misinformation and far-right talking points, where in focus groups, when you actually talk to these people, and they have to go back and forth with actual voters, right? Mm-hmm. They're not so strongly put on these opinions. They can be swayed very easily because they don't have a lot of information. They don't have a high level of political sophistication. Mm-hmm. And so that's what a lot of these polls were picking up in the beginning, and it's not an accurate depiction of the actual electorate of those that vote. I think, secondly, there's some strategy involved here, too, where if you can make the case that there's a political realignment or a significant number of black people supporting Trump and Harris, it creates somewhat of a false equivalency. And it dampens a lot of the talking points about Trump being dangerous to the black community, about Project 2025 being racist and being detrimental to the future of racial progress, because now you could say, well, black people are supporting him, so it's not that bad, or these things aren't true because he has more black support. And so it actually can create a sense of apathy within the black community amongst those who are thinking about, should I vote? Is it that important? Well, if the narrative is out there that, well, both of these candidates are getting some black support, so they can't be that bad, it causes less people to feel like they really need to engage and be activated and participate in politics. So there is a strategic element there, too, where if you can create this sense that, Trump does have some black support or more black support than in the past, he's not that bad. Maybe it's not that important that I get out and vote. Right. And that we see that, right? We see this false equivalency being somewhat successful in this election as the turnout was down, right? And some of that has to do with incumbency, where it's always harder for the incumbent president or the incumbent party to make the case that it's really important their voters get out. And so the Democrats really needed to focus on, one, getting good public opinion polling, accurate data of the black community early and often, and then two, continuing to make the case that this election is just as important and that we don't really have this shift to Trump, that's not accurate, that's not coming from real data, and he really is the threat that we're saying he is. So all of that's kind of wrapped up into this narrative. Right,
and it really is. I mean, we've seen these strategies before, which is really about, we talk about whether or not people are actually trying to persuade black voters and give black voters to, to come out in support of them, or whether or not there's just an attempt to dissuade participation, right, to depress the vote, right? That people feel like, well, there's really no reason for me to show up because a story is being written, right? And so maybe there's not, and we've seen that, we see that all the time. So as we think about, right, this is the question that I asked Cornell to some degree as well, and we'll talk about this a little bit more. But I just want to get just off the top your thoughts on, as we look toward. We still have elections in this country, right? At least for the moment, right? Like there is off-year elections next year. There's governor's races. We know that there'll be the midterms in 2026. Just what do you think about, like, how should Democrats understand what engagement then needs to look like, given what we just talked about? How should Democrats understand what engagement with black voters needs to be as we prepare, right, for these upcoming elections, these upcoming points of intervention, I would say?
Yeah, I think the last few election cycles have made it clear that Trump has a base that he is able to activate through sort of this racial rhetoric around white replacement theory, economic anxiety rooted in racial resentment, and ideas that really activate people regardless of what the political context are. And they're going to come out, they're going to vote. He's going to continue to grow that base based on this rhetoric, and we'll see how successful that is if and when he's no longer the candidate. But this Republican strategy has been really, really successful, and so Democrats have to find a way to match that in years where they don't necessarily have much of a strong policy defense to make. And so going forward, they're going to have to meet a lot of unlikely black voters where they are and not necessarily chastise them for not voting, but make a clear case that they understand why they might not vote, why they might be disillusioned or feel like their voice doesn't matter, and then make the case that, one, your voice can matter. Here's some ways that you can see political influence through your action, and then two, your voice matters in protecting what's already been gained and making sure that the threat of continuous or future regression from racial politics, like a step backwards, if you will, doesn't happen. And that can be just as an important use of your vote and of your political voice than anything else. And so the case really has to be made meeting voters where they are from the start and then trying to bring them into the fold with an understanding that the policy is there and the policy takes a long time and is complicated and will eventually come. But if you don't vote now, it's going to be even harder to see any type of results or returns in the future.
Right. And so you're making the case, and we'll talk about this on the other side, that we really need to go after those voters who made that decision this time, right? The decision to sit out and explain, right, why it's important that they continue to engage. Okay. When we come forward, more in our conversation with Dr. Chris Towler of the Black Voter Project. Stay with us.
More of the Black Pack with Adrianne Shropshire on KBLA Talk 1580 when we come forward.
I'm Amber Payton with 4 things you should know from BIN News. Diddy appeared in a New York court Friday seeking release on a $50 million bond as he awaits trial for sex trafficking and racketeering. A decision is expected next week. Wall Street is closing higher to end a positive week. At the closing bell, the Dow Jones Industrial Average gained 426 points to 44,296. The S&P 500 rose 20 points to 59,69. The Nasdaq gained 31 points to 19,003 points. Los Angeles is a step closer to becoming a so-called sanctuary city. It formally establishes a policy preventing the city from helping federal immigration officials with roundups or other actions aimed at illegal immigrants. The ordinance still needs a second vote because of amendments and then Black Mayor Karen Bass's signature for approval. And a new mural honoring the legacy of former Black D.C. Mayor Marion Barry will be unveiled this weekend. A ceremony to dedicate the mural will be held tomorrow at the Marion Barry Jr. building. Get BIN News 24/7 at BINnews.com.
Stop traffic continues back in Burbank from Buena Vista Street over 35 minutes as a crash means in the carpool in left lane of the 5 South before Verdugo Avenue, Olive split. Watch for heavy delays on Pomona's 57 South connector to the eastbound 10 as it crashes in the right lane, and this is involving a vehicle that was hauling a wood chipper. Heavy traffic continues back in Acton as Sigler crash means blocking the 14 North off-ramp to Crown Valley Road. 25 minutes of a backup still runs heavy from Escondido Canyon Road. And in Long Beach, watch for a backup from Main Street over 25 to 30 minutes as an accident on the right shoulder of the 91 East before the 710.
Hi, I'm Kyle at Blindster.com. I started Blindster in 2010 in my garage after I overpaid for new blinds. I researched the industry, hired my mom, and 14 years later, we're one of the largest retailers of custom blinds in the U.S. Don't pay too much for new blinds. Go to Blindster.com.
Is this the time? This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
UCLA is facing a must-win situation Saturday night in their rivalry game against USC at the Rose Bowl. The Bruins are 4-6 with 2 games remaining. If they lose to USC, the Bruins will miss out on playing in a bowl game. NCAA rules require 6 wins to be bowl eligible. USC at 5-5 becomes bowl eligible with a win Saturday. The NBA and NFL has issued warnings to all their players to upgrade their home security systems after a recent rash of home burglaries. In the past 2 weeks, the homes of Kansas City Chiefs players Travis Kelce and Pat Mahomes have been robbed. Home invasions also occurred in the properties of NBA players Bobby Portis of the Milwaukee Bucks and Mike Conley of the Minnesota Timberwolves. Tomorrow night at 7 here on KBLA, join me and my co-host Neil Scarborough for Out of Bounds. 60 minutes of sports chatter with some flavor. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson on KBLA Talk 1580.
Follow the leader.
KBLA Talk 1580.
Follow the leader.
If you're not following KBLA Talk 1580 on all of our socials, then you're missing out. Download our app and find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and on the web at KBLA 1580.
That's right.
Again, you can find all of our socials at KBLA 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about.
By the way, if you miss any of our weekday shows in real time, you can always catch up by checking out the podcast of your favorite shows at your leisure. At KBLA Talk 1580, we've got your black.
Follow the leader. Oh my God. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader.
If you have asthma, you know that there are certain things that can set off your asthma symptoms. These things are called triggers, and patients with severe asthma have an average of 8 triggers. It could be pollen, dust, pollution, colds, viruses, smoke, or stress. If you know your symptoms, you have already taken the first step to managing your asthma. The next step is to write your triggers down in a notebook or journal and record your symptoms when you come across those triggers. This will give your healthcare provider valuable information about what you can do to help manage your triggers. By understanding your triggers and writing them down, you are on your way to taking back control of your lung health. Visit luma-edu.com for more guidance. This message is brought to you by Amgen and AstraZeneca.
Linking social justice and climate justice all year long. We're unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
KBLA Talk 1580 is committed to self-care and community well-being. Walk Good LA was formed in June 2020, inspired by the Black Lives Matter movement and the beginning stages of the COVID-19 pandemic. What began as a few minutes of breath work and yoga meditation before protests against police brutality turned into a safe space for the community to heal in hard times. The immensely positive response from the community transformed the momentum into a movement. Today, Walk Good LA is a Black and Brown-led community wellness organization based in Los Angeles. They provide spaces for healing through community yoga classes, guided meditations, hikes, run clubs, and other activations throughout Los Angeles that attract hundreds of members weekly. With the help of Propel and Michael B. Jordan, they now have a yoga and wellness studio in Los Angeles called the Walk Good Yard. To join their mailing list and connect with healing spaces, please visit walkgoodla.org. That's walkgoodla.org. Or find them on Instagram at walkgoodla. This is a community call to action, a community call to healing from KBLA Talk 1580.
You're inside the Black Pack with Adrianne Shropshire on KBLA Talk 1580.
Hey now, say now. Hey now, say now. Hey now, say now. Hey now, say now, I done slid on a back street, heavy on the Parmesan, everyday tax season. What the you wearing, bro? It's tacky. Laying on a deathbed trying to match me. Oh my God, I'm about to do the fool. They be screaming out P, but they resume is boof.
You are listening to the Black Pack. I'm your host, Adrianne Shropshire, here at KBLA Talk 1580, and we are joined by Dr. Chris Taller, principal investigator at the Black Voter Project. And that, Chris, was for you. Since I know you're getting into hey now, I think that's what you said earlier.
Yes.
So I want to sort of lean back into this conversation that we were starting to have, and that I raised some of these questions with Cornell Belcher earlier in the show, and that is about the conversation that's sort of swirling inside of the Democratic Party right now. That is, both the sort of, I don't know, maybe expected, or we should have come to expect this sort of meltdown from the Democratic Party at this point when elections are lost. it sort of started out with this, kind of what I felt like was attack on its base, right? Like blaming, like the blaming and finger pointing, certainly was about, stuff inside the campaign and who did what and outside the campaign and IEs and, future forward and whatever. But it was also, this undercurrent of the voters, right? Which voters were responsible for this loss, right? And it really was kind of an attack, I felt like, on Black and brown voters, right? And that's where the sort of Black men narrative, they attempt to extend the narrative around Black men showed up. It was obviously about Latino voters and Latino men, but it really was this sort of like, who do we blame? Well, it was them, right? And sort of the takeaway then coming out, these sort of hot takes that are coming out of everything from donor advisors to, strategists and others inside the party is this idea that, maybe we went too far, right? Maybe we went too far on, addressing, issues that our base cares about, right? We need to talk about things that these Trump voters that we want to, bring back into the Democratic Party. We need to talk about things that they want to care about, that they, want to hear about. And you responded earlier on social media to someone who posted something about the need to, a fundamental, a wholesale rebuilding or something like that of the Democratic Party. And so I wanted you to just touch on that a little bit, because it does feel like that is, there is this sort of like, let's just throw out the coalition, right? And then center something else, right? That actually, should not be the conclusion, right? Or from my opinion, it should not be the conclusion that any Democrat is coming out of this election with, that we should throw it all out and recenter a set of voters who have told you time and time again that they're not voting for you.
Yeah, that's a pretty insane conclusion to draw as the numbers keep continuing to grow for Harris as far as total vote count. She's within 1.5% of Trump in the popular vote. Looking at some of these battleground states, right, it's looking like Wisconsin, she's going to have lost by less than 1%. Michigan, about 1.5%. Pennsylvania, 1.7% difference. Georgia, Trump wins by 2.2%. And so these are, again, very, very marginal numbers here to discuss dismantling or rebuilding the entire party. And when you really discuss something like that, what you're really saying is that we need to move away from the base identity of the party, which really since the 1960s has been Black voters, and a push towards progressivism and a focus on civil rights and freedoms and continuing to expand democracy. Right. And so any movement away from that is going to be extremely difficult to sort of justify, one, with the election being so close, and two, with Black voters remaining the most steadfast group when it comes to support for Harris and the Democratic Party. And again, we just talked about this. The narrative was already there, right? We could foreshadow it back at the beginning of the campaign that if Black voters in any sense slipped from their support for Harris and the Democrats, the finger was going to be pointed particularly at Black men. A lot of us were saying that wasn't going to happen. That shouldn't even be a talking point, but it was out there. It still continues to sort of be out there swirling around, driving these narratives that maybe we need to kind of start over with this coalition, when that's the complete opposite direction we need to go, right? We need to really continue to lean into some of these ideas that are actually really popular across the board, right? There's a lot of narrative out there now post-election where people are saying, oh, wait, I didn't know that was part of the Affordable Care Act. Oh, wait, I didn't know that that's what was actually meant with tariffs. And so a lot of the Democratic ideas are really popular. And so it's really going to be about continuing to get those ideas out there and continuing to really mobilize voters, right? This election is really just about turnout and who was able to get more voters to the polls, more so than a mandate on whose ideas were significantly more popular than the others.
Yeah. And I think that's right. I mean, there's also the way in which, the Democratic Party has to be very careful right now in doing the thing that you just sort of, rightly, characterize them as doing, which is essentially saying, we need to move off and away, right, from the concerns of our base, and again, sort of center voters who, for election after election after election, very clearly tell you that they do not want to vote for you, right? I mean, these are voters who, when we talk about what Trump sold people, both at the beginning of his, political life and what he sold them at the end of this campaign was racism. Right. And that people, when we think about the surge in white voters, right, people bought into that, whether people want to accept that or not. Right. You said it very well, because I know that I've talked to, Democratic, longtime strategists, folks who were on the Clinton campaign and, all the way back. And I don't mean Hillary. I mean Bill, right? Who still seem to be in there calling shots, right? Who, suggested that, some of this, that it really is about economic anxiety, and people really were just concerned about the price of eggs. But you said something that was really important. You said that it's economic anxiety that's rooted in racial resentment. And that is when we think about the way that Haitian immigrants were attacked, right? Very clearly racist, but this sort of underground, undercurrent, right, of, well, it was, it's because, jobs are being taken, right? This sort of using the idea of the economy or economic anxiety to cover over, right, the racism, right? And I think that Democrats simply cannot say, well, if the people want racism, then we'll give them racism. You know what I mean? Like we need to figure out how we bring people who are very clearly saying that they are susceptible to these ideas that are being put out there, not just by Trump, but by the whole Republican Party at this point, that we need to do things that will bring them back in, right? And I think because you cannot have a diverse party and say, well, we're just going to allow a little bit of racism in.
Yeah, that's not going to work. And I think what you said is really important, that there is this idea that economic anxiety is central to understanding this election. But we've known for years, scholarship going all the way back to the Tea Party, right? A book in 2014 sort of debunked this theory, showing that of all the things predicting support for the Tea Party, economic anxiety was not one of them. Mm-hmm. And one of the strongest predictors was how people felt about Obama, and whether or not people saw Obama as a threat or as something bad for America. That was what was really driving support for the Tea Party. And those same sentiments, right, have pushed people towards Trump and MAGA to this day. So there's not really any question as to what the role of economic anxiety is here, if there is a role, right? It's really about this idea of what's going to happen to white people if another black person or if another person of color takes power. On the other side, though, it's really important, as you said, to understand the role that the Democrats have here in continuing to build this coalition, and that there could be a push back against the Democratic Party, a further slip into apathy and more disillusionment if the direction of the party moves away from sort of Harris and her policies, even her economic policies that were seen as very favorable across the board, right? The $25,000 down payment, right? Additional child tax credits. Right. These things were not unfavorable. And so to say all of a sudden we need to move against this, right? Our data suggested in October that 72% of black people felt that Harris represents the needs of black folk well. 75% thought that Kamala Harris's presidency would lead to change. Mm-hmm. And then we saw over time in the data that black people felt more and more as though the Democratic Party was welcoming to them as she became the candidate. So in April, only 28% of our people we talked to said the Democratic Party was extremely welcoming to black people. That rose all the way to 42%, almost 50% in October when Harris was, the election was coming to a close after Harris campaigning. And so there was a lot of work done here to re-merge black people into the party, to continue to sort of fight against that disillusionment and apathy that can be thrown away. It can all go down the drain depending on which direction the Democratic Party chooses here going forward.
Yep. Well, let's talk about that when we come forward, about what the party needs to do in terms of re-engaging, right? And there's some party building that they need to do. So more with Chris Tyler when we come forward. Stay with us. KBLA Talk 1580.
You're part of the Black Pack with Adrianne Shropshire on KBLA Talk 1580.
Medicare open enrollment is here, and it's a time you can make changes to your health coverage. Yet, watch out for enrollment and marketing scams. Remember, Medicare will neither call you nor solicit your business. Guard your card. Never give out your Medicare number to strangers. Unsolicited calls, door-to-door visits, and emails are prohibited. Take your time. Don't feel pressured to make a quick decision. Report scams to our California Senior Medicare Patrol at 1-855-613-7080.
Whether you're going over the river and through the woods in the capable Silverado 1500, getting the choir to church on time in the 3-row Traverse,
Thank you!
or driving cross town to deliver your famous Cajun-spiced holiday turkey in the Equinox EV, America's most affordable EV with a 315-plus mile range. Add confidence to every holiday adventure and get it done with a rugged and capable Chevy truck or SUV. Find your red tag. Get 0% APR financing for 36 months on select popular Chevy models when you finance with GM Financial. Chevrolet. Together, let's drive.
Offer available on all 2025 Equinox and 2024 Silverado, Equinox EV, Blazer EV, and Silverado EV models. The monthly payment is $2,860 for every $1,000 you finance. Example down payment 22.2%. Must finance with GM Financial. Some customers may not qualify. Not available with lease and some other offers. Take new retail delivery by 12/2/24.
Thank you!
KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
KBLA Talk 1580, connecting you with services and solutions. The Autopsy Initiative provides a second autopsy free of charge for victims' families who have lost their loved ones due to a police-related death. The services offered through the initiative include the completion of a second autopsy, disclosure of preliminary findings, and a final autopsy report. A police-related death is when an individual is harmed by police officers using deadly force, which results in an individual's death. Police-related death includes in-custody deaths, including those that arise during contact with law enforcement officers during arrest, pursuit, booking, transport, or incarceration. The Autopsy Initiative has a team of board-certified pathologists on call. An autopsy request may be completed by anyone with a close relationship with the victim, which may include the victim's spouse, partner, relative, close friend, or lawyer. To request a free second autopsy for a victim of police violence, please visit knowyourrightscamp.com. That's knowyourrightscamp.com. Then click on Autopsy, then click on Request. At KBLA, we believe in justice for victims of police violence. We say their names, and we don't black down. This is a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
Let's get back to more of the Black Pack with Adrianne Shropshire right now on KBLA Talk 1580.
All right. Well, thank you all for listening to the Black Pack. We are here with Dr. Chris Tyler of the Black Voter Project. And, you know, Chris, I want to talk to you a little bit about just the idea of what needs to happen going forward, right? So we did talk some about, sort of like not throwing your base under the bus and keeping it moving. But there really is some civic engagement and some infrastructure building that probably also needs to happen, because again, if there were 6 million Biden voters who chose to sit out, there has to be some re-engagement with those folks, and that re-engagement cannot happen, a month before the next election, right? I mean, that's part of the problem. Now, like I know that for us, we felt like we were running out of runway. Like we knew that there were more voters that we needed to get to. We sort of put our heads down, ran as hard and as fast as we could in all the states, but we ran out of runway. And so, because you cannot fund this work in the final hours, right, of a campaign. So, what are your thoughts on what the party needs to do, and even outside the sort of independent sector, what needs to happen in terms of building the kind of civic engagement infrastructure that can hold people and bring people in?
I think that's a great question. Clearly, I believe the party needs to lean into its base, and instead of running from this quote-unquote identity politics framework, to highlight the way that the party is working towards this multiracial coalition to build an expansive and open democracy. I think that's the best way forward for Democrats. Looking towards any other demographic, any other group is going to, make it very tough, because they're trying to sway voters where majority or plurality did not vote for Democrats. So leaning into the voters they already have and just making the case that they should get out and vote, that it's imperative that they vote and we can win elections is the way to go. But as you mentioned, the investment into grassroots organizations, mobilizing organizations, particularly ones in the Black community, needs to happen now, right? It needs to be a multi-year project. Right. That's how Georgia turned blue in 2020, right? With groups like Black Voters Matter on the ground, doing bus tours, getting people out, working with the Abrams campaign, eventually, right, pushing Warnock into the Senate. That's what needs to happen across the country in these battleground states in places where there's significant Black population. So investment in places like Black to the Future Action Fund, Color of Change, the Black Male Voter Project. There's, dozens and dozens of these organizing groups that could use help from the Democratic Party, the DCCC, the DNC, all of these places that have huge fundraising apparatuses to invest in these organizations to continue to get people out and registered to vote into the polls come election season. In addition to that, the message needs to be one that really speaks to, again, these unlikely low propensity Black voters who oftentimes feel unengaged, disengaged from the political environment, feel like their votes don't matter, feel like neither party is really working towards them. Research that we did during this election cycle that my colleague and I, Dr. Chris Parker, did as part of our research with our firm, Black Insights, suggested that one of the largest predictors of whether or not someone was going to vote throughout this election cycle was their views of Trump and whether or not they saw Trump or the MAGA movement as a threat to the Black community. And so there are forces out there at work that can kind of aid in the Democrats making the case where they don't have to rely on a policy agenda that some of these disengaged Black voters don't relate to or don't feel like have influenced their individual lives. It might be a little bit easier after a couple years of Trump's presidency. I think that helped in 2020, right after 4 years of Trump. A lot of the Black community, because it was right in their face, how sort of anti-Black and discriminatory the administration was, especially coming out of the summer of George Floyd.
Right.
And so, there's going to be a lot of different things changing that the Democrats can use to their advantage and really have to lean into, along with investment in the Black community.
I do think that there are these opportunities, right? And we talked about. So first of all, I also think that there's a little bit of level setting that I always feel like, we talk a lot about elections, and elections aren't the only way for citizens to exercise their power, and so it's important to remember that, right? Like there were moments, right, when we think about what are the various intervention points, and we just saw one, right, where folks push back on Democrats inside the House and sort of push them off of their support for the nonprofit killer bill, right? And so folks should be clear that it isn't just elections, right? That people are called to stand up for their communities and for democracy and for our rights. But there are these interventions, right, along the way as we think about headed into 2028, and starting just next year, right? Like there are these off-year elections that are important, and one of the things that I always feel like it's so critical to remind people of is that even in places like, and we've talked about this a little bit a couple times on the show, that even in places like North Carolina, where the vice president wasn't able to sort of get over the hump and win the state, there were huge wins, electoral wins in that state that will be so critical and so important to being, sort of a firewall for the citizens of North Carolina, right? They run the governor's race. They won an important state superintendent of schools. I don't know that they've called. I haven't looked back yet, so I may get this wrong. I'm not sure if they've called the state Supreme Court race yet. But state Supreme Court seats are obviously really important in terms of protecting residents, and they'll have another one next year, right? That'll also be really important. But it feels like there are opportunities to win closer to home. Right. And so that's a role not just for, all of our community groups, et cetera, but also a place for the party to lean into and thinking about how are they building out the state parties, right, to be able to support the work that's happening where there are going to be local and state elections that are going to be as important to how people's lives are lived inside their states. And so it seems like that's another place, right, where it will be important for the Democrats in general to think about, well, how are we supporting supporting and shoring up what is happening in our states, right? Whether it's governor's races, mayoral races, that will be coming up in the next couple of years, whether that's New York or LA, right? But just your thoughts on that, because it feels like we're talking a lot about the federal elections because we just came out of a federal election, but there will be moments and opportunities over the next couple of years to actually focus on building wins, right? So having these sort of incremental wins that give people a place to plug in and exercise their power so that we're preparing, right, for the next big elections.
Yeah, the statewide battles are going to be just as important as anything in the next couple of years, having governorships that turn blue or stay blue. As you mentioned, winning state Supreme Court battles, passing initiatives. The state parties are going to be a place to look as well. Yep. State parties had some success this time, as you mentioned, North Carolina. The state Democratic Party saw success in Wisconsin. The state Democratic Party had far more success than elsewhere in the country. So these are definitely going to be models to look for when trying to figure out national politics. And I think one thing that I wanted to mention that we haven't talked about much yet is there's also going to be a lot of efforts to suppress votes and continued and maybe expedited pushes to keep people from voting with barriers to voting. There's already been talk of a national voter ID law, and this is where having state politics be as favorable towards Democrats and expanding votes as possible is going to really pay off down the road, right? If you want to get as many voters as possible in 2028, you need to make sure that in the years leading up to 2028, you're resisting as much of the voter suppression legislation and fighting back as possible. And that happens at the state level. And so, as you mentioned, these races are going to be really important. And again, the midterm elections in 2026 are only a couple years away.
That's right.
The strategy, the investment for that needs to happen now.
Yeah. And that is always the sort of, downfall. And this is, again, I will say, and for as long and for as loudly as I can, the idea that you wait until the last minute to invest in pro-democracy work. And I think that's, that is the work that we do. When I think about whether it's Black organizations or not, right, the work that we're doing is pro-democracy work. And that work needs to happen all the time, and it needs to be invested in. And so that's just my little shout out to donors and foundations, right? Like, this is what you were supposed to be shoring up when we think about, how do we protect what we have in this country. So, Chris, I just want to say thank you. I mean, again, we have been, I've been watching you and following you. And I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show tonight. And I do want to check back in with you, though, as you all get this last survey, the sort of post-election survey out to maybe have you come back on and talk about what you learned, because you all's data is extraordinarily important in terms of how we understand the Black electorate. So appreciate you taking the time to join us this evening, and appreciate everyone who is listening in. I see you all in the live chat on YouTube. I appreciate your commentary. I want to thank you all for supporting the work that we are doing here at the Black Pack. And I want to say to everyone, have a happy Thanksgiving. I know that people will be gathering with family and friends, and I hope everyone just finds some time and space to step back away from all of the hard politics that we're seeing happening all around us. So again, thank you for joining us here at the Black Pack. Enjoy your weekend. The Raw Report is up next.
KBLA 1580 Santa Monica.
I'm Amber Payton with 4 Things You Should Know from BIN News. The president of Spelman College has officially left her post. Dr. Helene Gale announced she would not be returning following a leave of absence. The school has not revealed why Gale initially took a leave of absence. Gale had been president at the all-women's HBCU since July of 2022. A state-level delay in a prepaid phone tax could widen Chicago's 2025 budget gap by $40 million. Black Mayor Brandon Johnson